When we think about African Americans and Jews in the 20th century, they've had real commonalities, and the common ground has been a pursuit of small d democracy. And what I mean by small d democracy is a democratic society that is free of anti-black racism, of anti-Semitism, of sexism, of any kind of discrimination based on national creed or ethnic origin. And as we've expanded that small d democratic ethos, even things like physical disability, right? That's why we have the American with Disabilities Act. What's interesting when we think about African Americans and Jews, we usually think about the heroic period of the civil rights movement between 1954 and 1965. The relationship actually predates that, especially if we think of the civil rights movement as a long civil rights movement between roughly around the early 20th century, founding of the NAACP in 1909, all the way up into the present, meaning the civil rights movement is not a struggle that just has a high point and ends, but actually has continuity. By the time we get to this heroic period of the civil rights movement, and by heroic period, I really just mean from 1954 to 1965, from the Brown decision to the Voting Rights Act. Certain things stand out. But when we think about SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC is going to be probably the most important grassroots organization of the civil rights era, right? And in the early 60s, SNCC has a dream and a quest for a new America, which is a sort of biracial, integrated democracy. And when we think about the white volunteers who went down to Mississippi, who went down to Cambridge, Maryland, who went down to Alabama, many of those volunteers, in fact, were young Jewish students from colleges, anywhere from City University of New York to Swarthmore to Harvard, Brandeis, and what have you. And that's really an important legacy to remember. A lot of times when we talk about the tensions between the groups, we really don't talk about the fundamental common ground that occurred between those two groups. At the same time, I want to talk about divisions between African Americans and Jews historically. In a way, when we think about the civil rights movement talks about race transcendence. In the aftermath of the civil rights movement, when we think about the Black Power movement, we really do get more into a politics of, I don't want to say identity politics in a negative way, but a politics that really talks about power, race, and identity in really, really hard-hitting ways that at times upsets old allies. The Obama candidacy and really an Obama presidency potentially has real power to restore aspects of a relationship that was not necessarily as nostalgic as people may claim, but certainly in another historical context, there was much more common ground.
Historically, Republicans have gotten, ever since Nixon, 20–25% of the vote. It's driven Republicans crazy over the years as they see Jews becoming wealthier, in some ways becoming a little more conservative, although still to the left of the rest of the country, being very concerned about Israel, worried about flare-ups like Jesse Jackson and things like that in the Democratic Party. They've tried over and over again to sort of bring Jews in. And McCain, I think, was in a way the latest great Republican hope to do that, in part because of Obama's, the perception that Obama was not strong on Israel and all the rumors about him being a Muslim and the black-Jewish tensions that we're all familiar with. What's been interesting to me is how that essentially has evaporated since the Republican convention. There have been a number of polls done by Republicans and also by the American Jewish Committee. Right now, actually before the economic crisis, Jews were tending about 57-30 for Obama. I suspect that gap is even wider now. And when the votes are finally tallied, I think McCain will end up again with about 20 or 25% of the Jewish vote. And the question is why. One of them is sort of that perennial, sometimes politically incorrect statement that Nathan Glazer once made, which is that Jews live like Episcopalians, but they vote like Puerto Ricans. It is true that while Jews, have succeeded and by every sort of social demographic measurement should be voting Republican, should be becoming more conservative, they're not. And I think one reason for that, frankly, is cultural, and I think the Palin nomination really showed that. John McCain is not your typical Republican. And one of the things that has made him such a formidable candidate up until the past 3 or 4 weeks is that he was not closely tied to the right wing, to the evangelical wing of the Republican Party. And with the Palin nomination, I think it once again reminded a lot of Jews that there is something that makes the Republican Party not a home for them. I was in St. Paul at the Republican convention, and when Sarah Palin gave her speech, at one point she started criticizing the mainstream media. And all the press were all sort of gathered in sort of like the balcony and loge seats, kind of off to one side, looking down on the convention floor. So when she made this attack, a lot of the delegates turned and started pointing at the press, going, you. And all that flashed through my mind was that great line in the Woody Allen movie where Woody Allen says, did he say Jew?
Barack Obama has worked hard to attract the support of Jewish Americans. And one question might be, why has he worked so hard? I mean, just demographically, the Jewish population in the United States is a rather small population. But of course, it's a small population that has significance that far outstrips its numbers. So I think it's worthwhile just to tick off a couple of things about this population and why, especially for a Democratic candidate for the presidency, it's so important actually to try to attract the support of this population. Jewish Americans have been a very significant factor within Democratic Party politics. It's a small group, but it's a group that whose members vote in very substantial numbers. It's a group that beyond the group's potency at the ballot box, it's a group that has been influential in terms of just the general political culture. When you mention, for instance, the press, when you mention other facets of American political culture, obviously the Jewish American population is very important, fundraising, et cetera. So for Barack Obama, this was a very important population to attract. Now, what did he face? What are the difficulties? What are the burdens that he faced in getting the support of Jewish Americans? There are, I think, two in particular. At least there are going to be two that I'm going to focus on, and maybe there are others, but we can save those for the question and answer period afterwards. First, there's the whole question of Barack Obama's race. He's a black American, calls himself a black American, African American. And with respect to Jewish Americans, he's had to face two things. One is racial prejudice. There are certainly an appreciable number of Jewish Americans, white Jewish Americans, who are hesitant to vote for a black person to be president of the United States. And certainly there are any number of newspaper accounts that have made this point quite vividly. A second thing, and so, Barack Obama, his whole candidacy has been one very important thing, of course, that he's had to face and have to grapple with is the long tradition of Negrophobia in the United States. And one of the most remarkable things about where we stand today, it looks as though he has actually succeeded